one there. And then what we did on the second day is they observed some more creative process. Again, we had a conversation, but this time we asked them to devise an experiment. So if you think about how science in some senses works, is that they have a hypothesis, they have a body of knowledge, they have a hypothesis about something, a phenomenon, something they experience in the world, and then they create an experiment where they can repeat, that allows them to explore allows them to test their hypothesis, to explore it and to understand it better. So they had already, they said, oh no, it's much too much, we don't have enough time, it's too short, just 2 days. But it was clear they had already begun to theorize what it is they thought they saw. So are you with me? They've looked at dance making, they've begun to talk about it, they began to theorize what it is, they began to draw relationships. And so they said, oh, well, you're right, we have begun to sort of theorize about it, so we have actually tiny hypotheses showing up. So we said, well, create an experiment. We gave you the whole company for, each scientist had the whole company for 3 days, and Wayne, to do anything they wanted, any kind of experiment they wanted. And this also turns on its head something else, a sort of assumption that I had arrived a little bit with, and other people who were questioning the relationship and the collaboration. They said, well, science just treats, will treat you like a subject. So they'll treat you like an object, or you'll be a subject of their study, and how is that going to benefit you, because they'll objectify you. And it's not unusual that that kind of assumption might be made, but what we discovered is actually becoming a subject of their study, as long as we are engaged with them in conversation about what they were thinking as they developed the experiment. It was tremendously productive. It's very interesting, because in a way you're experiencing, they're saying, well, we think, we think the way that the way your coordination in relation to this stimulus is working is maybe like this, and they're bringing new language to it, and you're actually in the experience of being experimented with, but having that explained to you, and again bringing language to it, but you understand it in a different way. So that turned out to be very productive. So again, that's partly how this relationship came together, and without really planning it ahead of time, kind of stumbling on structures that were useful for us. One of them was to, become an experiment. Offer oneself up to an experimental condition, as long as you have the chance to discuss it. Now, there are situations in which you might be just a member of a big study where you sign a release form and you don't really have an opportunity to know what it is that's being looked at, because they'd actually prefer that you not know, so that might predispose you to certain answers. Now that can be a little bit distancing, but in this case we didn't set it up that way. It was very close from the very beginning. And Carl has mentioned a paper. There are a few papers from this period, so if anybody is interested in reading a little bit more about that, there's quite a lot of documentation, and we would be happy to send you those links. This just gives you a sort of taste. We analyzed Wayne's notation, his notebooks. I think this is a notebook from his dancers. Now, one of the things that this, and I'll just speak briefly about the notebook and then we'll move on, is that I described all of what was so interesting about this exercise that the dancers did, where they had to create this image of something that's invisible, but they had to visualize it in their mind and work with it, at the same time move around it and work with it. The notebook is also extremely interesting from the point of view of the cognitive psychologist, or from the point of view of the dancer, because the notebook is where you work out relationships. You'll see a little later a film clip where the dancers are moving, they're working something out, and they stop and they think. They go over and they write something down. So what they're doing is they're using the page to work out some kind of problem. So they're using it to help them move. Now, sometimes what I found useful, one of the things I'm interested in, also getting you maybe to think about with me, is that relationship is that the notebook then becomes an extension of their cognition. So the notebook becomes a kind of extension. It's a shared space. It's a space of shared cognition where the notebook, yes, is external. I mean, you don't see the dancer made those marks there, but when she's making those marks, she's doing it because she needs to relate to that page. She needs to use it in the same way that you use your computer to store. You know where all the stuff is, you can find it. It's like an external, it's like an augmentation device. And the same with the page. So from the point of view of cognition and how you're thinking about things and solving problems and making choices and organizing things and indexing ideas, you can do that in the body. But if you've got, the dancers are using the page to sort of help that process, to enhance that process. So you might be doing, oh, I don't quite remember. Oh, there was a list, I made a list there. Or you've got a bunch of movement ideas, you say, well, I'm just going to write them down, I give them names. Name, 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 name. And suddenly you've got an order, and you can rearrange those. Okay, I'll rearrange those, then I'll do it in this order. So there are lots of ways in which the page becomes you can think about it that way. It's just an extension of the thinking that's happening in the body, in the creative process. And the scientists have helped us. Some of the scientists, David Kirsch in particular, is very interested in that idea of thinking with the body and how the page extends that. Thank you. So I won't spend too much time on this unless you want to come back to it later, because I think I want to give you time to ask questions a little later. But this is, what's that?
No, sorry. I've got to tell the audience that obviously you will be.
Yeah. I'm just proposing a bunch of ideas here for you. I need you to tell me whether they make any sense or not in a little while. So this is but if you want to come back to this, we did try to program. Notice it says agent here. I mentioned an artificially intelligent choreographic agent. We did make this little sketching program, which allows you to draw a sort of geometric shape on the left and animate that shape here on the right with drop-down menus. And the dancers have worked with this a few times. One of the reasons I show you this also is to show you that our research phases have been associated with some of Wayne's work. So Taxi was a piece in 2004. And this research, even though this research spans, in other words, it cuts across, it's not about researching. Some people get confused about arts research. They say, well, if the choreographer's researching, he must be researching for his next piece, right? So he's gathering ideas together and the inspiration for the next work of art. But there's research that's just ongoing, that doesn't materialize or get represented or explored in the context of a single work. It might be research that's just ongoing, and this research is just ongoing. But there have been particular focuses of the research which have informed particular pieces. And the focus of the research here informed this piece called Ataxia. The focus of this research here informed the piece called Entity. And the focus of this research here informed the piece called Dyad. Now, I'll just speak briefly about this because tomorrow, and I don't know if some of you, David Kirsch, the scientist who, wait, you can't see that. Can you see that? What's on the bottom here? David Kirsch is a scientist from the University of California, San Diego, and he's speaking at this event tomorrow following me. And David will talk all about his research there, so I'm pretty much going to leave that to him to do there. Plus, I'm not, as I said earlier, I'm not one of the scientists, so I'm not going to speak from that position with any authority. But David's interest, what's interesting about this, though, keep thinking about that mind, keep thinking about the mind in relationship to the page, right? And how the page is kind of helping. And maybe the whole thing is one mind. Maybe this relationship, you can see the mind as an extension through the page. But you can go further than that. You can, and don't worry, I'm going to snap back to the individual mind in a moment, but just extend that idea a little further to the whole company as one mind, as a distributed, as distributed cognition. And there have been a handful of researchers, well, more than a handful. I mean, distributed cognition has been a kind of subfield within the larger field of cognitive science and psychology for 20 years or something. Mm-hmm. Edward Hutchins at San Diego was one of the first ones to research it. And the idea was that, we're not just individual minds running, we're actually, that our cognitive facilities, our thinking facilities, are distributed through the people with whom we relate. And they studied people often in working environments like labs where there's a lot of close interaction. And they've done really interesting analysis of how it is that represents a sort of single, that there's something about that distributed that can be explored and analyzed and thought about in such a way, I mean, in certain situations to improve those working environments, in other words, to give them advice how to be more productive. But in this instance, David was very interested in studying the creative cognition, the distributed creative cognition. So he videotaped, you see here are just pictures, so he videotaped from all different angles, 5 different angles, the company in every moment of the rehearsal, and then had students analyzing that video material, not unlike what's happening with sometimes with some of your work. I mean, really looking at video, annotating the video, being able to look for patterns. Now, some of the things David discovered and has written about, and again, if you are interested, there are papers he's written. The first paper he wrote, he discovered, he talked about 3 modes of making. So Wayne has a mode of making where he comes in and he shows a movement and the dancers learn it. He has a mode of making where he comes in and he's very close, he interacts very closely with his dancers. He moves them, he really kind of moves them and they move him. So he's kind of making on. So David said there's showing, there's making on, and then there's tasking. And this last one I'm going to get to next is where the dancers are given tasks and they generate movement material. But the thing that I've been most interested in is David's more recent work, where he's been quite rigorously exploring how it is that we think with the body. And the reason that's important is that so far I've said a number of things about thinking. So I've used the word thinking quite a lot. I've said thinking, in relation to this, and this is part of it. But I'm not super explicit or rigorous about. I'm just sort of generally saying this is thinking. I think that's okay. I believe there's enough general understanding about what I'm talking about. But actually rethinking what thinking is important in the science field, because there are people who think that thought cognition is very language-based, symbol-based processing, reasoning, analytic. But if you're in the dance field and you talk about, the intelligence, let's say that's you believe that the body has an intelligence, and of course you kind of experience that, and it may be the kind of idea you share with your colleagues in the field about the body being intelligent and also the split between the body and the mind, the body-mind. Sometimes you hear a Cartesian divide. It's something people bring up, but in science, and this is again, I'm not very expert in this in a very detailed sense, but you have people who are trying to theorize about embodied cognition. So they're really trying to theorize and be explicit about how it is the body's involved in the thinking process, in a problem-solving process. And it's productive in the sense that I think it's shifting some of the dominant thinking in the field in the science field. So David's doing some of that work. And his papers are interesting. So he's quite rigorously exploring what is it really to solve a problem through the body. Because it's not just moving. There's something specific going on when a dancer is solving what's known as a problem in their terms. So what is it that's specifically going on that's different from just walking down the street and stepping off the curb and not tripping, because that's automatic. So David's work is, I think, productive in the sense that it's more rigorous. So I'm being less, in a sense, rigorous about the terminology now. But I'm trying to draw you into an idea, some of the ideas we've been working with. So that gives you a sense of the scope of the of 3 of the projects we worked on. And now let's see. I don't want to get too. I want to be careful about my time because I'm being pretty relaxed in a way.